Okay. All right. We are going to dive in here. So thank you everybody for joining. My name is Nick. I'll get to a little bit more about me in 1 second. Welcome to Wyzant's post-college resume presentation. Resumes I think can be an extremely daunting task sometimes. I think they can be a little bit overwhelming, kind of intimidating, particularly if you're just finishing up school. It's not something that you've done a ton of work on before. So in order to offset this a little bit, this is going to be a totally unpretentious, much more straightforward, friendly way of approaching what a resume should and shouldn't be, AKA don't actually use the accents. So I think, look, there's a lot of times when we're creating a resume and trying to obviously it's a high stakes endeavor trying to get a job, especially in the current environment coming out of school, more college graduates than ever. So there can feel like there's a lot of pressure to do like every tiny little thing in a very particular, technically correct way. You're probably hearing a million do's, a million don'ts. A lot of them probably contradict each other. What I want to focus on with you guys today is really the big picture of what a resume needs to accomplish, and then some techniques on how to actually help go about accomplishing that. Fair question. Who is speaking to you through the internet here? So my name is Nick. I graduated from Georgetown University in 2013. I studied both economics and English. My career has involved a few different things. Specifically, I worked in film right out of college. Then I worked more generally in finance. Then I worked in film finance. In all three stages, in at least some capacity, I did work as a hiring manager. One of my main roles specifically, and hence why I'm presenting today, is that I was responsible for hiring interns for one of our programs. Now, interns naturally are often either college students or immediate post-grads. So I spent a great deal of time reading some very good and some not so good resumes from current students and from people who are just finishing up. I also work as a writer, which is additionally as part of my writing business and as part of my, as you'll see below, college admissions and test prep business. I also hire a lot of other tutors. I hire a lot of administrative staff. Similarly, often recent grads. Hence, I'm seeing very frequently a lot of the things that to me as a hiring manager work well or don't work well when people are sending over resumes. So let's jump into, actually, I wanted to show you guys some specific examples of recent grad resumes, but at the same time, it obviously wouldn't be appropriate to use my actual students or my actual clients' resumes. So in lieu of that, I'm going to show you guys a recent resume that I actually used while applying for a small gig. And I want to use the initial resume as kind of a secondary way of introducing myself. And I want you to think a little bit about the way I've presented myself here. There's kind of a range of different experiences, and then how it's coming across in this next resume. I'm sorry. One more thing before we actually show that resume. Two things you already know. A resume summarizes your academic and work background. One thing worth keeping in mind, that it highlights key skills through accomplishments. Obviously, you want to be communicating what it is you know how to do, what it is you know how to do well, but you want to be doing that not so much directly, but through actual actions. You know, if you've ever written any fiction or you've ever worked on any formal storytelling skills, you know that demonstrating character through action, you may have even just heard the expression, actions speak louder than words. Try to always show the things you've done to show that you know that you know how to do what the job needs, rather than just trying to pigeonhole exactly what it seems like it needs. Okay, cool. So take a second to look over this resume again. This is my resume that I've removed a couple of pieces of information, but otherwise this is the actual document that I would send out. So the actual job, and we'll get to the posting that I was applying for later, but the main thing that I want you guys to notice is that only in a limited way on here is anything relating to film or finance being reflected. Primarily what you see here, and this is because it was an education video opportunity, I highlighted my education experiences and I highlighted my most direct video creation experiences. So there's an argument that, maybe I should have just shown all of my recent experiences. Maybe I should have just shown everything I know how to do to show how maybe varied I am in all my different experiences. However, as good of an idea as that may seem, it's not going to demonstrate to the person reading my resume, right, the hiring manager that I'm approaching, that I actually know how to do this job in particular. Never forget, they get a ridiculous number of submissions for any job that's posted online. Even any job that's just getting kind of circulated more privately or a little bit less formally is going to get probably 100 applicants. You want to have a resume that jumps out as immediately relevant and immediately obvious to get to that first filtering phase. We'll discuss a little bit further some of the considerations about like when you're applying through an online job portal, the types of phrases you want to use when you're actually just like sending it in on like say a LinkedIn job application or Indeed or Lydia or one of the other major job aggregation websites. Organization-wise, I did something a little bit unconventional here. I'm going to show you guys another one of my resumes in a second, but I did something a little bit unconventional, which is splitting education work and other recent work. I wanted to show that like, you know, these two things were really separate and maybe suggest that I've kind of curated a little bit which experiences I'm showing, just so that if I'm interviewing with them and I start mentioning like maybe I have a background related to finance or film or something, I'm not acting like I've shown them all my experiences on the resume, and that way it doesn't seem like I've in any way been deceptive or something like that. Now, for what it's worth with you guys, you know, I started out with work experience, moved on to internships, then education, finally wrapping up with some personal skills and interests. You guys will probably have a slightly different organized resume if you've been really proactive and you've had some good internship or work experiences in college. Yes, naturally, you're going to put those in the work experience at the top rather than having a really thin internship section with no description. If what you guys would probably have as recent grads is put all your internships up top in that work experience section. If you've had formal jobs, put those in that section as well. Then put key activities, particularly those where you've had like leadership opportunities, maybe where I've put internships. In education, you can obviously basically follow the same model. Where you guys are, it's probably good to still include high school. You know, I'm nearing 30. I may not necessarily look it, but I'm nearing 30. I may not have to include my high school on there forever. I just still do for now. So keeping this resume in mind, the things it includes, the College Lad, Compass Education, 17 Sunset, I want you guys to also look at this next resume, which I used to apply for a different job a few years ago. So if you look on here, there are a few things that repeat: education, internships, and then Florentine Films as one of the larger work experiences, but everything else on here is different. You get an entirely different picture of me as an applicant, of my career experience, from this. It focuses on some studio analysis experience, right? Some finance and accounting at an independent film company. There's a few more like production company experiences. This is something that's geared much more towards something that's actually related to entertainment or related to even finance perhaps, but it omits the educational content in favor of instead focusing on, again, the pieces that are relevant. So you guys have, even if you haven't worked a ton of jobs or done a ton of internships, you guys have enough experiences at this point that you won't be able to, much less won't want to, fit every single thing you want to fit on. You want to be choosy about what you're including. Let's talk a little bit more about how to start thinking about what to include and not include. So the first of our main sections here today is what I refer to as the story in a resume, right? And the way I've put it below is that your resume tells the story of how you became the perfect person for this job. As we said before, you are competing, unfortunately, with hundreds, often even thousands of other applicants. It is absolutely a buyer's market from the perspective of the hiring companies. So keep in mind that they basically have their pick of the litter. They can choose who they perceive to be the perfect person for the job. So look, taking a step back for 1 second, we're trusting here today that like the jobs you guys are choosing, the jobs you guys are applying for, are jobs that you feel like you definitely are well qualified for, number one. And number two, are jobs you actually want to be doing. Obviously, you never want to lie or distort things, or really, you never want to like falsely exaggerate anything. in order to get a job, particularly one that you're simply not going to do well at. That honestly just never makes sense. Yeah, you might be able to get into the job, but you're going to really struggle. You may end up getting let go fairly quickly. Most jobs have basically like a 90-day period where that's still an evaluation period anyhow. So, that said, we do want to be careful about what information we present, and we want to create this picture of the perfect candidate because, again, they have their pick of the litter. So what we want to be thinking about is not only what are you showing them, but what sorts of experiences are you not including? What are the things that maybe make it seem like you may not be terribly interested in this job or you have other interests? Not so much just that like they'll doubt that you really want the job, although that may play a small factor, more so that it will seem like you're more focused and more directly sort of have had all these forces in your life and experiences coming together to prepare you for this particular gig. So considering this picture of who's the perfect person for the job comes from a couple questions you can ask yourself. And I really recommend that you guys sit down with a pen and paper or just sit down with your phone, pop open the Notes app or sit down with a Google Doc or something and really just start brainstorming those two questions I have at the bottom of this slide. So number one, what is the job looking for? Luckily, most jobs make this very easy. They will literally list out, number one, the job requirements, but number two, also some of the other things that they're looking for in a candidate. They may explicitly say like, okay, we want someone who knows like say Microsoft Excel. We want someone who has experience working on small teams, or we want someone with experience in another more specialized kind of software or working on big teams. They will usually say that stuff. The thing is though, that you may also want to take into account other information about the job that's not quite so directly stated. To be a little bit more specific, they'll often, like, you might think about the difference between applying to like a large bank versus just a startup. A startup is very likely looking for candidates who have a broad range of experiences, right? The going buzzword is wears many different hats. So if you've done a lot of different things, that actually might appeal more to a startup who's looking for someone who can pick up lots of different tasks, even if they don't state that directly. So always be sure to do a lot of research on any company you're applying for. On the other hand, let's say you're applying for an internship or a job at like a large bank or another large corporation. They probably have a much more standardized sort of corporate structure in place. Therefore, they're going to want to slot you into a particular position. You're going to want to show, rather than that you've done lots of different things, that you've done a lot of one thing. So going to the next step, going from what they want to what you've done, think about what you've done in each phase of your life thus far that relates to this job. Are there high school activities that relate to it? Are there college extracurriculars that relate to it? Are there actual jobs, actual internships? Are there personal experiences, maybe learning opportunities, maybe even like you took a class somewhere, maybe you volunteered doing something that's somehow related to this? Anything that you can connect with what they're looking for is potentially helpful. You may need to do some work to actually select at the end, but if you're looking to fill space, even things that don't necessarily seem obviously relevant to a job could still be very useful right at the beginning, in terms of setting up what should be included in your resume. So a couple things to go a little bit more granular about like how to decide how to figure out what a job is looking for. Yes, start with the job description, think about the hiring company. I also want to put your attention on keywords. And undoubtedly, this is a phrase that you guys have heard before. Keywords sometimes will be put directly at the bottom of an actual job description. They'll tag it with like different skills that the job needs, or maybe like, the level of seniority of the job or something like that. Those words, so yes, sometimes they're explicitly at the bottom. Other times they just kind of bury them in a paragraph describing what the job functions are, or what the job responsibilities are, or what they're looking for in a candidate. In either case, you actually do want to, again, in the course of describing your accomplishments, the actual things you did at your jobs, you want to put those pieces of information word for word into your resume. Because at a larger company especially, they will have software that trawls through resumes and automatically filters for keyword density, meaning like those resumes that have the greatest number of hits against what the job application actually described. Now, that software does have some level of flexibility. Basically, like it will catch phrases that they directly put on the page, plus similar phrases, but you don't want to stray too far because you want to get as much credit for matching the description, painting that picture of yourself as the perfect candidate as possible. Okay, cool. So moving ahead a little bit, we're going to revisit my resume in a second. I'm going to talk you guys through some of the choices that I made in how I put it together and in what I chose to include versus exclude. But first, take a look over this sample job description. That was the one that I was actually applying for. It's for large company, IXL, big educational video and content company. So they were asking for someone who would create short instructional videos for middle school math students. They kind of described the length, they explained the process, conceptualize, shoot, and produce. They definitely want someone with like some level of like personality and knows how to make video presentations somewhat fun. Hopefully you guys buy that I'm someone who's capable of doing that. So if you notice though, what you'll be doing and what we're looking for in this case mirror each other almost exactly. Like the things you'll be doing, kind of we're looking for someone who's done those things before. So they mentioned teaching and tutoring 6th, 7th grade math. Okay. They mentioned recording, editing, and producing videos. I'm like, okay, so I definitely have experience doing that. I don't have a specific accomplishments. I've tutored some middle school math students, but not a ton, not in a way that I could really reflect it. So we'll talk about what I kind of did to work around that. Ability to present material in an effective, engaging manner. We'll discuss that as well. Age-appropriate vocabulary and instructional approach. They were also asking for a pitch in terms of like how to actually create the video. So that was mostly reflected there. Bachelor's degree preferred. For you guys, wrapping up college, that's something that is either in hand or maybe in hand next year. Finally, coursework in math education. Okay, again, not something that works in my favor, but maybe I can swing that, like economics plus my background with teaching math is kind of sufficient to do this. So with this description in mind, let's take another look at the resume that I presented to them. So you guys will notice that I sort of mentioned right off the bat, like the College Lad, which is my tutoring business. So I sort of described there that, okay, so I founded the company and led a team of 5 employees. That may not immediately appear relevant to making educational videos. I think it has some tangential value in the sense that it shows I know how to like connect with other people, operate a team, manage a system, get things done, hold myself accountable and hold others accountable. This is obviously important things in pretty much any job, stated directly or not. Now, again, I'm kind of working against this problem I have in this job where it's not like I have like this incredible amount of experience tutoring middle school math. So I'm going to compensate by emphasizing some strengths that I think are in related areas. So here, wrote and published textbooks for SAT and ACT that I also used as curriculum with students. So that's communicating that conceptualize the videos part. So come up with content and ideas, things that I need to actually communicate, and then communicating it in an effective way. If I've written whole textbooks, hopefully that's communicating that I have at least a decent idea how to do that. I also mentioned that I work with Wyzant on projects like this, creating videos and webinars that are related to also education. So the idea is, yes, I've presented on screen before. I have at least a decent idea of how to go about doing it. It's not that I'm just going to go in and make a video completely cold. Finally, I mentioned that I presented on test prep and admissions to families. Again, that's really about communicating that like, I'm going to be a good person to have on video. So basically like I've spoken in front of large groups before. I know how to go about doing this. So really, really emphasizing that area is going to be a strength. Again, wink, wink, nod, nod, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, kind of a way of compensating for the shortcoming in missing a lot of middle school math teaching experience. So next I brought up my experience working as a tutor and a curriculum writer for another big company. If any of you guys are based in LA, you might know Compass. So where I worked as a one-on-one tutor, and I helped them develop some of their, basically I helped write some of their practice sample ACT tests. So sometimes that involved writing actual math questions, but it definitely involved me teaching group classes in math. Now, this is not middle school math. It was high school math. Again, wink, wink, I didn't exactly emphasize that point. I just kind of left it unstated what it was. But I said I led comprehensive math classroom programs at competitive LA prep schools. So I'm covering a wide range of math topics. Therefore, I have experience teaching math in a competitive, demanding environment, kind of like the online education scene. I also mentioned that I design curriculum and prep materials appropriate for a range of student ability levels. So again, experience conceptualizing education and then making sure it works for a lot of different people. So I'm going into such detail on all this stuff, you guys, because I want to make sure that you have like kind of a clear sense of like the thought process that goes into it. Okay, what are the things I want to prioritize here? I need to show that I know how to make videos. I need to show that I'm going to be engaging on screen. I need to show that I have some decent idea of how to communicate academic concepts. That's what I'm trying to hit here. The other side of this job, obviously, is the actual video production aspect, which is what I'm trying to cover through like the 17 Sunset description, where no, it's not educational content, but it is commercial video. I also kind of snuck in that I created and sold a comedy web series to a YouTube channel, which, you know, was part of my work alongside 17 Sunset, but it kind of hints that I like might know how to make video that people actually enjoy watching as well. Finally, those internships are repeated. If you look over them, they're all related to video editing or production. Education, I just always leave it the same. Skills and interests, obviously I mentioned as part of skills, cameras and an editing software, Adobe Premiere, if you know it. Those were two things that seemed like actually relevant skills to the job at hand. I also could have mentioned that like I know how to use Microsoft Excel. I also could have mentioned that like, oh, I could have mentioned that I know a lot about like I don't know, fiction writing or really anything that didn't necessarily have much to do with this job, but I left it out because I want them to focus on the things that are directly connected. Okay, and then interests, again, definitely not directly connected, chess, poker, basketball, philosophy, and the art of the perfect ribeye steak, but hopefully it shows and kind of hints that I'm like, you know, a person who's interested in a range of different topics, that I can kind of be light when the situation calls for it. Definitely art of the ribeye steak, I promise you, like I hope is not the funniest joke I've ever come up with. It's not even really funny, but it definitely shows like an ability to kind of have like a sense of levity about approaching a serious situation like a resume. Okay, cool. So again, hopefully that was kind of helpful talking through a little bit about sort of some of the choices I made and the decisions that went in. One more time, want to remind you guys that you guys should definitely put your internships up top. Don't break them out like I have them here. That's where your activities should go as a recent grad. Moving on. So one thing that I help a lot of people that I work on resumes with is how to actually write good descriptions of the things they've done. One of the hardest parts is one of the hardest parts about writing a good description is that, one of the hardest parts about writing a good description is coming up with what to mention in the first place. Again, going back, that should all be determined as much as possible by the keywords in the job, by the actual things that they mention in the description about what they're looking for in a candidate. So once you've figured out what those things are, we got to figure out how to put them in a good way. So I mentioned keywords. Again, you want to reemphasize, you want to repeat those words as much as possible. Next, metrics, try to slap numbers on things as much as possible. Frankly, not something I did an excellent job of here. I got in like, the 250 point improvement in terms of like student progress, but I don't really think I did that good of a job on this here. It was kind of tricky to like, quantify. Maybe I could have said like the length of my textbook, maybe the number of videos and webinars that I've done, maybe the number of presentations. But again, like, it didn't seem like those numbers really meant a whole lot, but anytime you guys can put concrete numbers on things, at least consider doing that. I also put a few what I call evergreen verbs on here, things that make it sound like you had a lot of responsibility, something that, again, something that like accountability pretty much every job is looking for. Managed, led, oversaw, supervised. You guys might hesitate to think that you managed, led, created, directed stuff in internships where, largely you're kind of just doing the work that they assign you. Maybe you're doing a lot of like educational training as part of like you're learning a lot about the job in the course of it too. But you guys will be surprised. Think through every single thing you did every single day. Go, like literally be encyclopedic, write down every experience you had at your internships, at your activities. You'll be surprised at how many things you were solely responsible for. Anything you were responsible for on your own, you managed that, you oversaw it, right? And that sounds a lot better. Like, I had one intern who, as part of our program, like we always do kind of like an exit workshop on resumes. And, you know, she like, it was such a small thing, but she did it extremely well. Like she came in and she just took over the office kitchen, which when you've got a bunch of hungry people is actually a huge, really consequential job. And so she like, you know, she wrote an awesome resume line, which was like, oversaw kitchen inventory, maintenance, and snack distribution. And like she kicked butt doing that job. And she really did take ownership of something that no one else was doing. So, you know, taking again a step back from the resume itself, if you're in an internship now, if you're in a lot of activities now, think about what jobs aren't being done that you could take over. That's going to add a lot more meat to your resume. Anything you can really be responsible for. All right, so let's do this. This part's kind of fun. So this is description transformation. A few of them came from my resume, so I can tell you exactly the thought process. Another one I saw on another one of my former interns' resumes, which I thought was hilarious. So, you know, I kind of started out with like when I was being encyclopedic about my experiences at that big education company, I was like, okay, well, I taught those math classes. And I was like, all right, but how do I shade this to make it sound a lot better and more relevant? So not just taught math classes, I led comprehensive math classroom programs. I was in charge of actually leading the class. I had to organize the scheduling. I had to organize, you know, the what the actual curriculum was, what we taught, how to do the assessments and everything, right? So I definitely led that. You know, that's true. Now I added the word comprehensive. It's true. I covered a huge range of things from 6th grade basically through 11th grade. And then finally at competitive schools, again, just to kind of hint that like it was important that this was done right, that it was sort of being held to a particular standard. On the other resume I showed you of mine, the one that was kind of more focused on the finance and film, obviously one of my jobs in finance and in film finance was making a hell of a lot of spreadsheets about all sorts of different things. But if I just say I made spreadsheets, number one, it's really unlikely to show up as a keyword. Number two, it sounds kind of vague, like, you know, it might not sound particularly exciting or like I really know what I'm talking about. If instead I get specific, corporate financial modeling, cash flow tracking, cyclical and specialized reporting needs, including heavy Excel. So look, that stuff might sound super fancy if you've never worked in like a finance department, but you guys, if you're writing down everybody, like the cost of everybody's lunch order, that's cash flow tracking as far as I'm concerned, right? You're tracking some amount of money that's outgoing. Maybe you're even responsible for like larger pieces of the cash flow, great, but cash flow tracking could be almost anything, right? Corporate financial modeling, if you're listing out, if you're, you know, maybe not just tracking information, but if you're projecting any kind of expenses or like you're doing any kind of budgeting, that's corporate financial modeling. Corporate has to do with a company. Financial, it has to do with numbers and money, right? Modeling just means you're representing it numerically in a spreadsheet somehow. So these are very broadly applicable phrases. Last, I mentioned cyclical and specialized reporting needs. Cyclical reporting needs is if you're writing down the cost of the lunch orders every day. That's cyclical. It's on a cycle. It happens every day. Specialized is just if you asked to do a specific project. So, you know, notice like, yeah, a little bit, let's be honest, is kind of like fancifying it and BSing a little bit. But notice that all that stuff is true. It just sounds a lot better. So think about, you know, if you got to break out your thesaurus, you know, but a lot of these things will be actually referenced as keywords in the job search, or in the job posting itself. Try to think about what things you've done that do align with that, even if you may not be totally familiar with the terminology they're using. Google it. Figure out if it's more related to what you've done than you think. Finally, tracked payments. Another one of my jobs back in the day was to was basically make sure that like all the checks, all the bills got paid, and that we in turn received payment on all our invoices. So I you know, again, that can be made to sound a lot more specific. Just as a general writing rule, more specific is almost always better. So management of accounts receivable, including calculation and invoicing of sales fees and producer reimbursable expenses, sounds a lot better. You know, it describes what the payments are. I promise, if you guys just be specific about like what payments are, or like, you know, what exactly whatever your job was, it's going to sound a lot better. And as promised, finally, a fun one at the end. One of my interns had delivered pizza, and he came to me with this line. I'm going to be honest, I told him to scrap it in the end, oversaw distribution of consumer goods in the West LA region. I laughed my butt off. I thought it was hilarious, but I think it is a little bit overkill. I think this slightly crosses the line, as funny as it may be, in terms of like realistically presenting what you actually did. It really is a push and pull. You want to be truthful and you want to make yourself sound as good as possible. but you don't want to like exaggerate to the point that it's not at all clear what you actually did, even if that quote literally is true. All right, cool. So I know we've had a couple questions about formatting. We are here at this point. So formatting and organization, you guys where you are today should absolutely keep your resume to one page. The biggest, oops, sorry, that keeps, oops. I'm sorry about that, you guys. There we go. Okay, so keeping it to one page. Maybe like 15 years into your career, you can stretch onto 2 pages. But again, if you're being selective about what it is that you really want to, if you're being selective about what you're including on your resume, what you're not including, you shouldn't need more than a page to do it. If you're having a hard time fitting everything you have on there, change the font, make it really small, change the margins before you extend onto a second page. You guys can fit a ton of content onto a page by messing with the margins and messing with font sizes. Another thing some people like to do is they'll put a summary at the top or their objectives, what they're hoping to do. In most cases, it's not that it's bad. It's just not that it really helps that much. Like I've definitely hired people that have a summary at the top, and I've definitely rejected people that have a summary at the top. It wasn't a decisive factor one way or the other. I think that the utility of it, the sort of argument for actually including it, increases the more your experiences don't really line up with the job. Like, again, if you know that you can nail this job, if you know you can do it, but you kind of need to justify some of the stuff, then I might argue for writing maybe no more than 3 or 4 sentence summary at the very top that kind of explains, focuses more on where you want to go and what type of person you are, rather than just the job experiences. Because in your case, maybe the job experiences can't speak for yourself as much as you might want. So again, if your experiences are not super on point with the job, maybe summary. But if you've got enough real meat on there that connects with the job description, you probably don't need to include it. Just let them focus on your experiences. I also mentioned simple format with no graphics. Again, that's software that most companies will use, particularly when submitting through an online portal. Can distort it. Don't use any pictures. You saw the simple format I have. It's got some pretty fonts, but overall, it's fairly straightforward. Put the most recent work up top, as we said. It should start with all your work experiences, moving its way down to education. If you guys are doing multiple things at once, which in college you almost certainly are doing, like an internship and multiple activities at the same time, put the most relevant stuff first. The things that relate most directly to the job. Barring all else, put the most impressive stuff at the top. Make a strong first impression. All right, cool. So that's actually in terms of the pure presentation I have. That's all I've got for you guys. However, I do have a few sample resumes that we can go through. We can talk about some of the choices these other people I've worked with in the past. But I want to open things up to you guys in terms of audience questions. I know we had a couple about formatting. Let me just double check that I answer these. Oh, okay, here's one more here. So the question is, for someone coming out of college with little to no experience, would you still recommend only mentioning job-related information or all information to fill up the page? My answer would be that again, the margins can cut both ways. If you really don't have stuff that's related directly to this job, think about your high school activities, think about your college activities, think about volunteer experience, think about classes you've taken. These are all things that you can use to include on the page. So I would find a way to basically fill it up. If you're getting to like 2/3, 3/4 of the page, just make your fonts a little bit bigger and narrow the margins a little bit. You want to give the appearance that you are filling up the page. I promise you, margins and font size will work wonders. A lot of English teachers won't let you get away with it back in school in terms of like page count, but resumes are a totally different story. Feel free to mess with those. All right, I'll open it up to the floor here. See if there's any other questions that people were curious about. Again, anything in terms of like overall resume strategy, any of the specific things that we talked about here. If you guys even have specific questions about like my resume, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that more. I feel like I've talked about it a lot, but yeah, just opening it up to anything you guys are curious about. You guys could just type them directly into the Zoom chat. By the way, I think by default it goes directly to the panelists, so we will see it. All right, cool. So, you guys, please, by all means, feel free to chime in with questions. Even if you have super specific like questions about your situation, about how to set up specific jobs, or like how to describe certain jobs or experiences, I'm happy to talk through that with you. We have like a slightly smaller group today, so we can go into detail. And I think for pretty much everybody, it's going to be at least somewhat helpful to hear about how we think through how to phrase things, how we think through what to include and not include. So even if you have hyper specific questions, please do feel free to ask them. Um, uh, if there's no questions like that, I'm going to start talking through a couple other resume samples. Like I said, it wouldn't really be right to use my students' resumes. Um, so I wanted to show you actually some of my friends' resumes that I've consulted on. Or before I do that, I guess we had another question come in. So question is, are languages spoken a good point to mention under skills? Awesome question. I love it. I think it's the sort of thing that I would mention under skills. Yeah, like, if there's particularly like if there's several different languages that you speak, I think that's awesome. If if the job is something about, say, translation, or if the job is something that like might actually require you to be multilingual, I might make a point of actually including it in more spaces than just under skills. I think that, like, number one, like speaking multiple languages is kind of universally recognized as like something that represents a lot of like multicultural experience. You're better able to connect with people from a lot of different backgrounds. It also may have some specific job utility. It's also recognized. I mean, there's a lot of research on like how speaking multiple languages kind of makes you smarter. I mean, I think people are kind of broadly aware of those trends. So I definitely would mention skills. Other good things to mention in skills, maybe just throwing these out there, would be things like, like a lot of times people will say like Microsoft Office suite. I don't know. I mean, like, maybe like if you've done a lot of presentations, you can just say like, presenting skills. Like I'm not convinced that saying like PowerPoint skills is going to be super compelling. Like I made this presentation on PowerPoint, like PowerPoint pretty much does it for you. I think it's an expectation that you have that. The one exception I would say is like IT skills, like true technical skills, like particularly if applying for anything that has to do with like working with networks. Another one would be Microsoft Excel in particular. Like if you really know how to create a spreadsheet and write a lot of formulas, that's something that not everyone knows how to do. It's not nearly as self-explanatory as creating a spreadsheet is. Cool. Thank you guys for all the questions. So another one is, where should certifications be placed on the resume? I would say that it depends primarily on whether the certifications are directly relevant to the job or not. They are the sort of thing where, if not directly relevant, the certifications, if you're crammed on space, you may want to put them just as in the skills if they're not directly relevant to the job and you're jammed on space. If instead, though, those certifications are directly relevant to the job, like if you've done a bunch of coding classes, or like you passed an online certification for, I don't know, like Java or Python or something, and this is a coding job or a coding internship, I would put it as big of a section as like what I have in internships here. So I would probably just like say certifications. I would put it probably below your work experience and your activities. I would put certifications right below that. Although I know that in some industries, there's a lot of people, we can actually look at an example. Let me see if he did his this way. So here's an example of someone who does have certifications. Again, this is one of my friends. So he's in finance, so he put his securities licenses down at the bottom. Other finance resumes I've seen put the securities licenses at the top because they're such requirements for actually doing the job. I think you're safe to put them just above education, just above skills and experience, if relevant. If not relevant, put them as skills and interests instead, because I think like like speaking foreign languages, it's just kind of an evergreen thing that people recognize as being especially helpful. or just kind of representing a lot of knowledge. Let's see. Okay. Thank you guys again. So, all right. So question is, if you have work experience from a different field, should you include that on the resume or remove it? Then offered an example. If you have work experience in the medical profession, but you're applying for a job in business, again, awesome questions, you guys. Thank you very much. So what I would argue is that it depends on a lot of factors, but I would say first off, if the experience can be connected to the new job, then include it. Also, if you don't have other things that are more directly related to the job, to the business job, then include the medical experience stuff. Like having some job experience is definitely better than having no job experience. So include the medical stuff if you don't have anything else to compare it to. Once you build up a little bit more experience, it becomes much more of kind of a consideration about what to actually not include. If so, I guess to kind of summarize all that, if you have something better to put there, don't include it. I would say though, that this is actually something that comes up a lot. Like people will have volunteered in a medical office in high school even, or like, just worked in the medical field. You'd be surprised how much of the work is directly applicable to business if you think about what the kind of day-to-day experience was really like. Any kind of data tracking, any kind of inventory tracking, any kind of customer facing interactions, anything to do with like logistics, anything to do with like, the business management. Sometimes people volunteering or working in a medical office will have responsibilities relating to the accounting or something like that. That stuff is pretty golden for including on a business job. It shows that you've thought and experienced how businesses actually run, and then kind of thought about how to really, that you've thought about how business is run, and that you'll be able to apply that in this new situation as well. So avoiding giving a dodgy, it depends type answer, I would say include it, try to connect it as much as possible to the business field, to the new business job in particular. The only reason you wouldn't include it is just if it would force you to go on to a second page, or you already have like, I'd say the threshold is 3 to 4 other more specific business experiences. If you have 3 to 4 internships, like in business, just put those. You probably don't need to put the medical job, particularly if it would push you onto a second page. Hopefully that gives a clear, unequivocal enough response there, but feel free to ask a follow-up if there's any additional info. All right. Cool. So I'm just going to jump onto this next resume as well. And please feel free to keep asking questions, you guys, because that's primarily what we're here for. But I just thought I'd talk you through some of the things I thought were done well, and some of the things that I thought weren't done as well on this resume, and actually on one more as well. So you'll see that I think in terms of organization, it may look a little bit familiar, or in terms of organization and font and everything. That's because I gave them this resume format. So I think, it's just a simple, clean format I use. It's not like there's a right or wrong in terms of font. I just thought it was a pretty good one. So I think one thing that jumps out to me on the page here is that he has too many bullet points in the first job. I mean, there's, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He's got 10 bullets. Get it down to 3 or 4 bullets. I mean, like, I think 3 or 4 really punchy, relevant bullets is about is about the right spot. And he did do that for the rest of the positions listed here as well. So I think all of those, just to the eye, look a little bit better. I noticed that the first bullet is kind of like a personal introduction. It's not the end of the world. It reads a little bit awkward to me where it is. All of a sudden, it kind of goes into the first person, whereas nowhere else does he use the word I. That seems like something more that if he does want to include it for whatever reason, he should probably just put it as an executive summary or just as a personal summary at the very top of the page. I think it reads a little bit weird, and it might read like someone who doesn't have a lot of experience writing resumes, which might be like not a red flag, but maybe a little bit of a yellow flag. Less so for recent grads, but still something like you want to come across as professional and like someone who knows what a resume is supposed to look like. So, he's got like his start dates as a bullet point too, though. I mean, they're already reflected elsewhere. I don't really think that those need to stay there. He's got dates on the exams that he passed, despite also including those further down the page. Again, none of this stuff really needs to be bullet points in this first one. I think it gets a lot stronger once he gets to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th bullet point, working with 22 wealth management clients. Looks good, puts a number on it. He's working with a lot of different people, describes who some of those different groups are, shows he has a range of experience with different types of clients. Again, gets granular in the next bullet point. This is starting to get good, right? So build financial plans, tailor portfolios, strategic rebalancing strategies. I thought that was a great turn of phrase he came up with. Really just means that like sometimes you buy some stocks and other times you sell those stocks and you get different ones instead. That's strategic rebalancing. So, you know, there's a whole cottage industry of coming up with fancy phrases for things that are fairly obvious. Kind of continues like, you know, there's a little bit of show offiness here, but I think it reads okay. You know, present growth opportunities by analyzing assets, fundamentals, technicals, sentiment, alpha, beta. Those are like specific finance terms if you're not familiar with them. And what he's basically communicating with that line is like, I know this industry, like I understand the job that I'm doing, which is something that you do want to show. Like, you know, as much as possible, you want to show that like, not only do you have the skills to do the job, but you've done that, you know, the lingo of the field kind of shows it'll be easier to slot you into it. So these other jobs, again, I think do a good job of being really granular, of being really specific and really direct about what to about what he actually did in those roles and how it's going to prepare him for this new analyst job that he's applying for. Notice that he has that he mentions a lot of situations where like, you know, numbers of people he's responsible for either as clients or coworkers. I think that does a lot to kind of show like, again, that he's not only does he have experience leading other people, but that he's won the trust of his bosses in being given these types of responsibilities. Think hard, you guys. You guys have been given responsibility by your bosses or by like, you know, the leadership in your clubs or in other situations that may not be immediately apparent. Think about the things that you've been given, that you've been tasked with. Those in a lot of ways are like honors, you know, like it's because they believe in you that they give you this stuff to do. Highlight the hell out of it. It's going to help a lot on these. Again, the securities licenses are appropriate here, not always. He doesn't mention internships. He just didn't have anything particularly relevant. One thing to mention is kind of the last job he has listed. I actually redacted the name because it's private, but he had co-founded a fashion business. And even though it's not directly related to finance, a lot of these, you know, I think his first 3 listings do a great job of showing that he has relevant finance experience. Then on this last one, he can kind of show that like, all right, he's actually had another angle on finance experience entirely, which is managing a small business. So he's kind of like been in the shoes of a lot of people who are potential clients. Shows that he's kind of got like, again, a range of interests. This is a multifaceted guy. You know, he knows how to do more than just pure finance. He's going to be able to be a little bit more flexible and adaptable maybe than some candidates who've only worked in one field. So, you know, I think that's maybe, we'll call it a 75-25 rule. You know, if you're going to include information that's, you know, jobs that aren't directly related to it, unless it's out of necessity by the number you have listed, I would say it should be about 75-25. And when you do list that other 25 jobs that are not exactly in the industry, focus on the ways that they do connect, the tasks and jobs you had that do. Cool. One more resume here to talk through. And this one is entirely different. This is for someone who's in for marketing and PR. So this job was specifically for someone who would work with PR firms to kind of help with, to basically liaison between the companies producing the films and the PR firms that were helping to promote them and actually get them out into the media. So I think to my eye, I think the way that this is broken down is much more digestible. You know, like there's only 3 jobs listed. That's in this case because she'd only had 3 jobs. But I think it works pretty well here because it shows that all 3 of them like are at least in the same industry. The first few are obviously directly marketing and, you know, mentions any opportunity. You know, look at those verbs like primary internal director. Oh, that's an adjective. Primary internal director, manage, liaison, then lists regular duties, shows that there's a lot of them. Next, you've got led, principal planner, traveled, provided support, okay, organized, managed, then daily duties again. A lot of stuff that's about real specific responsibilities, showing that this person had a lot on her plate in all these jobs, some of which she was solely responsible for. even, you know, then down in office assistant, which is pretty much bottom of the rung in terms of corporate hierarchy, talks about responsible for compiling and organizing client work for personal portfolios. You know, that's something that she alone was working on and doing. You guys have those things. Just think about what they are. Talks about the training, heavy phones and scheduling responsibilities that'll remain relevant. I just want to point out one other slightly unconventional thing she did with education that I thought was kind of a smart call. Um, she had taken this class at UCLA in journalism, which she wasn't originally going to include because you know, it's sort of like, okay, well, I'm not a writer. But I was like, look, I mean, if you know about journalism, it's going to make your job communicating with PR people and with journalists a lot easier because you kind of understand the way they think and the demands on them and getting their job done. So rather than just including it as a small bullet point somewhere else or just mentioning it as like a skill or interest, in this case, I said to give it full credit as part of her education, even though it was just one class. So going back to that earlier question we had about like where to put certifications, it really does sort of depend on the level of relevance to the job. All right, cool, you guys. So that's it that I have in terms of presentation material. We're almost wrapping up our hour here, but I'm going to hang out for a few minutes, see if you guys have any more questions. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. I know Wyzant will be kind of circulating a video version of this if you want to go back and check anything out. I believe they'll also be circulating contact info for all the presenters in this series. So feel free to reach out to us and you know, ask me any specific questions you have. Keep in touch, and I appreciate you guys joining. Thank you very much.